Thank you, friends. You are generous and kind, and my wife has now told all the truth that even when it's hard, I love it. And but you ought to tell the truth about yourself and about others. I'm so grateful for the privilege of being Cynthia's husband, and for the 39 years we've been married, and even for the years of courtship, which you don't get to count toward the marital bottom line, but for those years that we've known and loved and cared for and supported one another. And if there's anyone who is in my corner and has the wind beneath my wings, it is Cynthia Marie Beatty Palmer. My dad gave me some advice when, I was courting and this one and that one, but he, and now it's not that many friends, really, yeah. So the advice came when he saw that Cynthia was around a lot, and over a period of years, and he's given me great advices, but this one he said, which is just kind of homespun, but greatly wise, and I've given it to many others. He said, "Son, marry somebody that's in your corner." I want you to know that'll work. So she's been in my corner, and I'm in her corner. When we're not doing this, sometimes we're doing some other things. And so we have the opportunity for that mutuality of support in addition to the love. So thank you, honey. And there's nothing that makes her happier than flowers. So, and I would say it even for her exceeds chocolate. So flowers, and more flowers. So friends, thank you for your largesse. My other great happiness in this season is that of being your Episcopal leader. You've received us warmly and generously, and I'm loving it. I'm having fun, and just praying for grace and strength, not just for these sessions, but each and every day, because we live in a complex world, a complex time, and it's a interesting place for the church to find itself. I don't ever want to let on that the church has never seen anything like this before, because that's then to shrink history down to my experience and my knowledge base. And in fact, God has been leading God's people even before time, wooing us into existence and leading us. Now, my assignment in this time, and they've given me an hour, I'm going to tell you I'm not going to take it because, Episcopal addresses come and go, but there's some business that we're required to get done. And while we are in pretty good shape financially, as has been mentioned on multiple occasions, we don't have enough money to throw around just willy-nilly having extra sessions of the annual conference because we didn't get our voting done. Am I coming through today? And I want to know, is this microphone on? So the alternative is to call us back into session. And somebody did give me a note from our staff team that our contract with Options Technology ends today. So should we not finish, we would then have to move into the old-fashioned paper voting on things. So that's not a threat, it's information. It's information, and it is truthful. It is truthful in every way. So, but I want to do a couple of things in this so-called Episcopal address, and I want to recap some things that I said last year, and give you a huge shout out. I want to add just one thing I'd like you to do out of one of the asks that I gave to you last year, and you have in marvelous ways stepped up in every way to those asks. And then the second thing I'd like to do is to talk a bit about one of the things I announced, which was saying that I thought it was time for us to enter into a strategic planning process, and that has begun. I want to kind of give you a status report, but not a package that's wrapped up with a gift inside of a bow, but an invitation to some continuing reflection and work as we move forward. So on last year, I asked you would you join me in doing several things? And you may recall there were 5 of them. I asked you to help get us over the top ahead of schedule on Imagine No Malaria. You remember the initial timetable I threw out to you in 2013, which was my first annual conference with you, was to say, let's get it done by the time we march into General Conference. That would be the $3.5 million. And we have every reason to believe now, even though there's still some sorting to do, and some of which cannot be done until the staff returns to the office, that we have hit that, maybe even exceeded that. And as soon as we have absolutely the facts on that, it'll be put out to you through every medium that we have available to us in the West Ohio Annual Conference. But today, and last night I went to sleep living in the confidence that we were at $3.5 million for Imagine No Malaria and counting. So I said I wanted to recap, but I want to give a big shout out and say thank you to you. Now, the second thing I asked you to do was to eliminate the nuns. No baptisms, no professions of faith, etc. Even as we try to reach the nuns, meaning the non-affiliated persons with religion, let alone Christian faith in our society and in our culture. And I asked 3 things: that we would repent of our lethargy, that we would believe that the gospel is good news for others, and I would say for everybody, and that we would, the catchphrase was, eliminate the zeros. And there are signs that that is happening, and you've heard those reports. Dee Stickley Minor gave one when she presented the missional report. You've seen some through the Denman Award. There are other presentations coming today that will show snippets of ways in which you are doing that. That's our work together, and thanks be to God that you have been responsive because our consciousness has been raised. We certainly have not plateaued on numerical decline in the life of this annual conference, and we're still in some places where we're hurtling fast in the wrong direction, but we are in some places and in some communities where we are moving absolutely in the right direction. And my advice, my counsel, and it's not unique or brilliant on my part, is that if we, it's all best if you love everybody. But if we would begin to love folks that we've not simply had on our radar screens. People coming to Jesus Christ, people reinvigorating the God in them, as we heard yesterday, and finding ways to express that in a Christian community of faith that worships, that fellowships, that studies, and that serves and transforms the world, I do not believe would be a problem. So while the statistics on the nuns in our culture are rising, part of that is they've been there all along, friends. And it's now more culturally acceptable to say, no, I'm not affiliated with a church, a synagogue, or a religious community of any kind. There's not any shame in that game. I don't have any problem that there's no shame in the game, because shame is not a terribly winsome way to win people for Jesus Christ. We have something to offer. One of my dear friends in East Ohio, Dave Scavuzzo, now at the Strongsville Church, blew me away. He was the chair of the Conference Evangelism Committee some years ago, right in this auditorium. I was sitting near microphone 4. I told you I've been here before. And Dave, as our Conference Evangelism Committee, began his report with something on this wise, talking about the ineffectiveness and the lack of usefulness of focusing our evangelistic outreach on getting people ready to die. And then he offered a scandalous statement. This is 20 years ago. He said, I could care less about people dying without Jesus Christ. There was an gasp in the room. Then he came back, because it was his job to get our attention. He said, what I care about is people trying to live without Jesus Christ. So he flipped the script. Either we've got good news for the world, or we ought to get out of business. The hymn writer said the world is hungry for the living bread, not for the stale corners of our toast where the mold is. The world's hungry for the living bread. Lift the Savior up for them to see. Trust him. Do not doubt the word that he said. He said, I'll draw everybody unto me. I'm living in that confidence. And I want to walk in that confidence, not in a triumphalism of the institutional church, but in a conviction that Jesus Christ can and does make a difference in every life. And it knows no barriers about our political affiliations, about our theological tribes. Either Jesus is the fire that's burning in the center, or it doesn't matter how right we think we are. It doesn't matter. So I join Dave. I care, and I want you to care about people living without the power of Jesus Christ in their lives. And may I just say one more thing, because I'm already off script. They don't even know what slide to put up next. Some of the folks trying to live without Jesus Christ are in the church. I didn't say that they don't know and love God, but there's a lot of functional atheism, saints. And we're expressing it. I mean, it can hit any of us, trying to live our lives without reference to the God who has disclosed God's self in Israel and in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I asked you to join me in taking it outside the walls, and particularly to focus on reaching children and through the lens of connecting with schools. And there were a number of things in there. They were options. They were not commandments. They were not dictates. They were opportunities. They were filters and lenses to say, this may be a way for you to find a path, to lean in. But what I wanted you to undermine, or to speak as Dr. Long spoke, to corrupt the corruption by coming alongside of children in our communities, wherever they are, in the most poor communities and in the most affluent communities, people that were children and young people that were underachieving academically, people that were living with the reality, and children especially, of food insecurity, and a reduction of violence in all of our schools. And whether it's the violence of guns and knives, or whether it's the violence of words and bullying, I asked you to find a way to connect with young people, not just your grandchildren, and not just your children, not just your nieces, and not just your nephews, but the kids in the school. And if you think this is something about, let's find a poor school only to connect with, because all this mess that the news outlets like is in every school. Kids get bullied in the most affluent schools. Kids get called out of their name in the most affluent schools. Not all kids underachieve academically because they didn't have enough food to eat or a place to sleep, but because there's domestic violence in their homes. And on and on and on. And you have been doing this in wonderful and powerful ways. The Freedom School movement is on the move. People are finding alternative paths if Freedom School is not the one for them. And we've got to do something that's not just in the summers, but like many of you, with adopt-a-school relationships. That's all year long. Thank you. I asked you to join me in reaching out to persons who were all along the spectrum of incarceration. And there were lots of places to dig in, from getting with Kairos or Horizon Ministry, which has more to do with going into the prisons, to connecting with families that are left behind, because when a person, and especially a woman, is imprisoned, a whole family is imprisoned in a sense. So I asked you to connect with people in that way. And we have been doing work in the annual conference to begin to aggregate the stories of what you are already doing or what you've chosen to pick up and do in the future. But all along that spectrum, from embracing returning citizens to connecting with families to working with people that are involved in the justice system and law enforcement, to find ways not only to reduce violence, but to make living in our communities more tolerable, more human, more humane, not just for those that have been there all along and never did anything bad or just never got caught, but for those who are returning to be in our midst. And oh, by the way, these last two, working with folks along the spectrum of incarceration, working and reaching out to children that are food insecure and otherwise, this is not mission separated from evangelism. We have no problem with access to people that need, and dare I say, want good news in their lives. Thank you for what you are doing to make a difference in your lives. And I know, because it's been true for me, that I am at least as transformed as anyone that I've tried to touch in relationship. Fifth thing I asked you to do was to give your very best to the unity of the church. I think I used the phrase avoid schism. But the other way to put it is to give our best for the unity of the church. We talked about circles of grace, and that has been picked up on. And because of so-called current events, one of the magnificent things is that when a decent idea, let alone a good idea, gets put out, people take it like you and shape it and use it in their contexts. And so even before some of the circles of grace that have taken place around some of the great angst in the life of the institutional church called United Methodist, in places all over this annual conference, but a huge poster child in the Ohio River District in light of events with people of color being shot down unarmed. Broad conversations about race. It's a tragedy, we needed to have them. It's good news that we've gotten our heads out of the sand, that we do not have a race problem. May I say to you, as lovingly as I can, we do not live in a post-racial age. It is a myth. It is a myth. I'm not sure we ought to be trying to live in a post-racial age, but to the extent that we are, and that means that we're trying not to be the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or the 19th century. Absolutely. This world, this nation is remarkably different. But when you think in global perspective, there are still places of deep pain, and some of them, with regard to race, are still in America. And we've seen it poignantly. We've seen it poignantly across the last couple of years in this nation with a number of high-profile incidents. So I want to say something that I've said in some other places around what would circles of grace conversations look like. We've talked about it with human sexuality, with race. And it's a kind of thing that, as the guy that lives in my particular skin, I have no interest in people thinking that it's a really sweet thing, but it is sweetly intended, I know, to say, Greg, when I see you and I hear you, I don't see you as black. Now work with me. This is all going to end up well. Because if you stop after I don't see you, that's the problem. And then you put any other category. You don't have to get stuck on my blackness. It could be gender. It could be other ways in which we identify ourselves and or ways in which we were created. And if one puts this in the context of Southern Africa, where the whole ethos is about this call and response in Ubuntu of saying, I see you. To which the response translated into English is, I am here. You create me, in a sense, when you see me. And when I answer, the community is formed. So I came by West Ohio to tell you, I see you. You're white, you're black, you're Hispanic, you're liberal, you're conservative, you're this, that, and the other. And on some things, you just don't know where you stand. But I see you, and you matter in your seenness. So may I say to you, I'm not mad, I'm excited. This is the gospel. You heard about the table of St. Luke, didn't you? Let's see each other. Let's see each other. And because if we cut off that sense, what other senses will we cut off? I can't hear you. Or to even be a little more contemporary, but not as contemporary as I think, I can't feel you. That's for those of you under a certain age. Don't get it twisted if you're over that age. It's all good. It's all good. I want you to see me, and I want to see you, and there are two things I ask, and that we should be asking of each other. This is not about Greg Palmer. This is about personhood. I want to see things in you that perhaps have previously, because of history and circumstance, been a barrier. And for me to live in relationship to you and to say, that is no longer a barrier to relationship. You with me? And I want to see you and understand, even in the moment, that I've got a snapshot, but we really live our lives in a series of moving digital frames. So even when I see you and I'm doing the right thing and I'm saying all the right things and relating in all the right ways, without investing in our relationship, I can't see all of you. So when a colleague stands and they say something and we then put a label on them, and so let me tell the story on myself so you don't think I'm looking over your shoulder. I was serving a congregation in the other conference. I hope none of them are watching this morning. That'll be. And one Sunday after the first service, I walked into the fellowship hall, and there were some folks who were sitting around drinking coffee, and they were the older guys, some of them, in the congregation. And I could give some other demographic information, but it wouldn't be that useful. But it was known that they were politically conservative, and probably to the extent that they were engaged in ongoing theological reflection would identify in that way. But they weren't people identified with a particular organizational camp. So I walked into the fellowship hall one day and heard one of the guys saying, as I was moving toward the coffee, he was talking to somebody else, but you know, sometimes people at a certain stage in life aren't aware as to how loud they're talking. And so they think they're having an A and B conversation, but C and D and E are hearing everything. Do you hear me today? And he said, and I had preached a barn burner of a sermon. And it was a come to Jesus sermon in an old evangelistic sense. It was appropriate to the text, etc. I don't even know what the text was. And this guy, with his leaning on his cane with one hand, was moving his fist with the other and says to the guy next to him, he said, "Dick, I told you he was a conservative evangelical." Fast forward. On another occasion, heard the same curmudgeons from the early service commenting at the coffee hour. Oh man, he had some way out liberal stuff today. You see what I mean? Even at a moment to try to use labels to constrain and limits our capacity for community. Let's defy that. And the only way we defy it is not by reading more books, but it's by having real relationships with real people, some of whom are fixed in their opinions all across a so-called liberal to conservative spectrum. Let's just use that one. And some folks who simply say, I know what I think about this and I know what I think about this. I don't know what I think at this moment about this. But I'm in community with you to learn how I can claim what I understand the gospel in this moment and in this context and with these issues to be. So as we continue to widen the circles of grace, i.e. multiply the circles of grace, I want to add one more thing, and I'm indebted to one of our pastors for reminding me that it was an opportune season as we head toward the general conference. And is Pastor Aaron Brown here today? Is he here? Yeah, where is he? Yeah, hey buddy, thank you for your help. And he said, you know, we ought to be doing some fasting and praying. Am I right, sir? And so I'm calling you because you've quickened me. That beginning this fall, on the first Friday in September, I'm asking West Ohio United Methodists to declare Friday as a fast day to the extent that that works for you and your physicality. So don't go do anything crazy talking about by faith, this, that, and the other. Take your medication, and if you have to eat to take your medication, there's no guilt. But from sundown and the close of the meal on Thursday until you break the fast, if you can go that long, on Friday, could we claim that as a fasting and prayer day together? If that doesn't work for you because of family arrangements, you know, I know if you got kids and you got to go to the game on, and band rehearsal and all that, the smell of the hot dogs is just intoxicating. I mean, popcorn, and I get that. Don't sweat it, no guilt. Just get you another period of time and do that. But I'm asking us to do that. It kind of aligns with Wesleyan tradition of a fast day, some of the early Methodist movement, that we, as my wife has said about herself and others have said about her, we can get prayed up. And we might discover some miracles long before we get to Portland. And those miracles might be local rather than global in scale. Because if you start fasting and praying, and we'll give you some suggestions of things to focus on these Friday times of fasting and praying. Imagine the miracles that can take place in your life, the transformation, the renewal, and the healing. We'll have more to say about all of this on the website. Now, I told you we needed to move into a time of strategic planning last year. We called together a wonderful strategic planning team. We tried to build on the fact report, and we're still a work in progress. But I want to tell you where we've gotten to. There's a slide coming up and I'll let just sit for a minute, that'll give you the names. And Joel, let it sit there even while I'm talking. You'll see some of the people that have been on the strategic planning team and have brought good leadership to us. And our sister, the Reverend Laurie Lossie, has been the chair of our strategic planning team, and she's been partnered with not only by staff in our office, but by the Reverend Dennis Moeller, who had brought some previous leadership coming out of the fact process so that there was a seamlessness. But you see these colleagues colleagues' names there. And we'll let it sit there for a moment just so you can see, who was there. And you can't do it with 1,000 people, but we made some progress in a couple of key areas, but we're not finished yet. The first is, we claimed out of that work a vision statement. And that vision statement is this, because we were asked by external consultants some pretty probing questions, and we questioned one another and tried to say, what is this thing all about? And this vision statement, sort of our working vision statement, says a world we see, so vision, we see a world of justice, love, and peace filled with people living in the likeness of Jesus Christ. So I just want that to settle on you. What we see going forward, what we believe we're called to engage in, is partnering with the triune God so that this whole world will be filled with justice, love, peace, and filled with people who are living in the likeness of Jesus Christ and who we believe to be the primary mortal instruments of that love, justice, and peace. Our consultants then said, well, what's your role as an annual conference in achieving such an ambitious vision? The Book of Discipline, paragraph 601, talks about the purpose of the annual conference is connecting congregations and people in an annual conference for mission and ministry, but to achieve the primary task of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And so we said that the fulfillment of that vision would require that we serve as an annual conference, and we would bend and shape everything in this way to equip and connect. So we've borrowed generously from what was already there. Congregations for missional service. And if you look at the paren that is in front of you, it says next to missional, outward facing service and ministry. Because it was the conclusion of your strategic planning team that in the aggregate, we are still in so many of our silos, which are in our local communities, we are still so self-absorbed. And we are deeply internally focused. And maybe we ought to stop worrying about how to save the church and join God in God's mission to save the world. And maybe in that way of being church, the church will be saved. We'll find our life anew. The master said, if you seek to save your life, you're going to lose it. I didn't say it. I don't especially like it. But I'm falling in love with it because the master said it. So you seek to save it. You keep gazing at your own navel. You keep worrying about your own institutional life. We need some structures and institutions. You will not get very far. And all of this in the light of what? Taking up the cross. Because Jesus knew that to take up the cross was costly and it was risky. And Jesus knows, I believe, he has not personally said this to me, that not only people but institutions often tend toward risk aversion. So if that's our mission and our purpose, then we've got a strategic goal that we're wrestling with and want to keep in front of you across the next months until we come back to annual conference, that we believe it's our job as an annual conference in all pieces and parts to help every congregation and faith community and every one of us as individuals to deepen our engagement in communities and in the world. We cannot participate and join God in the saving of God's world if we do not know our neighbors. There are 5 core values that we've claimed. They are all important and they speak of things already said, but love in all things. Costly discipleship, not cheap grace. Courageous leadership, connection, and unity in diversity. If we're going to begin to align our future in the next quadrennium around this vision and mission and strategic goal, then we'll have to stop doing some things like focusing on survival, focusing inordinately on property management and its challenges. Stop wasting time on chronic, toxic church fights. Now, you think I'm talking about the denomination. No, I'm talking about what we report in at the table. Friends, we're making it harder than it needs to be. And we just need to be delivered from the snares of the devil. Can I say it out loud? I mean, is that all right? And the devil, don't get hung up on literalism. Just relax. It's all good. Yeah. For those of you who think I'm a conservative, I'll still be that. And those of you who think I'm liberal, I'll still be that. It's fine. I've stopped worrying about it. Because here's what I know about a spirit and whether or not it has a personification in a proverbial devil. Let me tell you what I know is whatever that spirit is that pushes against the things of God. And even if that spirit doesn't have a name, even if saying devil makes your liberality make you want to jump out of your skin, here's what I know, and you know it too. That spirit majors in confusion. So if I can just get the saints fighting, number one, about things that don't really matter in the scheme of salvation history, the battle's already been won. Stop the toxicity. And stop worrying about the toxicity at the general conference and worry about it in your local church. Now, I'm not going to call the DSs up here to testify because you've loved them so wonderfully. But every one of them could rattle off 12 stories of toxicity on each of our 8 districts, and they wouldn't be through. They would just be self-limiting. We can do better, and we will. So here, there are 3 strategic objectives that we want to continue to work on getting meat on. Meat. That meat is not there yet. The first is to shift our focus even more to strengthen and support pastoral and lay leadership. And remember, we talked earlier in the core values about our cultivating courageous leadership. And we've done a great job across the last decade in ratcheting up clergy development, and I hear a continuing yearning in the life of this annual conference from lay people. We need some of that love too. Am I right about it today? So we want to have things that we begin to do together across this annual conference, and that will be diffused and dispersed throughout the annual conference that helps us to continue what we've done in our commitments to a highly trained and engaged clergy who are effective in leadership, and highly trained and engaged lay leadership, which can penetrate the life of a congregation. The second strategic objective, or bucket, if you will, is to challenge all congregations to be the light of justice, love, and peace in the world. So this is not something just going to happen from 32 Wesley Boulevard. It's something that we want you to trumpet blast, and we'll provide resources and tools in due season, and you will contextualize it, or your contextualization of it will become the resources and tools, because all of the knowledge and wisdom is not in any one institutional office. It's not at the conference center, it's not in the district office, and may I say, it's not in your local church office, but all together, we got everything we need. Have you ever heard that before? We got everything we need. Together, we have wisdom. Third, strengthen and focus our systems that support communities and make disciples. So these are the 3 big buckets we want to wrestle with. You will receive and have opportunities over the next 2 months to give some feedback to say that if these were our strategic objectives under this vision, under this purpose and mission, with these core values, what would it look like? What would the behaviors and the activities be as an annual conference that we would engage in What does the budget look like if we align the budget around that? And on and on and on. So that's the invitation coming today. You'll have opportunities to live into that. Now, I want to have you do one more thing. The district superintendents don't know I'm going to do this, but you're not going to be embarrassed. It's all good. I don't want you to wait, any of you, until you get another message from me. You're doing a lot of this. It's just that we're not all doing it together. You with me? And we are, as Putnam says, better together. So here's the deal. I'm asking for an 8x8 plan, and you don't need to wait for anybody in my office's approval or permission. And I'm asking every district superintendent with your district lay leader to stir up 8 bold, courageous experiments in the life of that district. If it's already going on, you cannot count it against the 8. Because I knew that was your next question. I don't want you to take something you're already doing. You may engage in some multiplication. But 8 bold, courageous, missional, that's the key word, which I've defined in this context along with others as facing out to the world experiments. 8. Now, it's a gimmick. We got 8 districts, 8 at least. You can go more. You can do 85 as far as I'm concerned, but you with me? I just want it to be memorable. 8x8. And when those experiments begin to blossom a bit or even take root, we're going to find a way to tell the story. Here's something we were not doing before out of Congregation A or in the life of this district. This is not about the conference or the district managing, but it's about a partnership, particularly within the districts, where we want to stir up some stuff. Because if we stir up enough good stuff, then other folks, I'm one of the biggest copycats in the world. And if more preachers would tell the truth, not most of their ideas are all that original. But so the preachers will still speak to me tomorrow. But deep inside, we know it's not copycat, it's learning best practices from one another. So that's my plea. You'll be hearing more about it. I hope you'll step up to the plate. You'll make inputs. But I want us to have a big celebration at some point about the 8x8 initiative. And we can point to those strategic, missional, courageous, bold ministry initiatives in the life of this annual conference. Friends, you've been very generous. Thank you for your time. I'd like us to have a 10-minute break now.